Our next topic is creating payment promises. So first, let's discuss what a payment promise is. It is a commitment that a customer makes to pay an amount by a specific date. So there are two components here in the promise, the amount and the date. Now, in terms of the features for this functionality, you have the ability as a collector to create a payment promise that involves one or multiple transactions. If it involves multiple transactions, then we refer to that promise as a mass promise. There are metrics that we deliver. Some examples are promise amount, broken promise amount, broken promise percent, etc., etc. We also have an info tile that we deliver that collectors can use to track customer payment promises. An info tile is a graphical object that will allow a user to focus on certain aspects of day-to-day processing. In this case, this promises info tile will allow a collector to click on it to view promises made by customers as well as the specific details of those promises, amount, schedule dates, etc. We delivered also a promise reconciliation report that you can run so that you can, as a collector or as a manager, reconcile payment promise activity against payments. So we'll be discussing the promises info tile as well as the promise reconciliation report later on in this topic. Now, what are some of the configurations that are going to be important for this payment promise functionality? The first place we want to navigate to is the collections preferences. Okay, so that's an important configuration that is broken down into three areas. There are global preferences, there are preferences, and then there are the correspondence preferences. So let's go to the functional setup manager, and then we'll take a look at these configurations in more detail. So I'm going to navigate to the functional setup manager. So from the home page, I want to click on the settings and actions menu where I see my user ID, and from there setup maintenance. Now here I'm going to select financials and collections as the functional area, and then on the right I'm going to go with this link, manage collections preferences. That's the name of the implementation task. So I'm going to click on this link. Here we are. Now here we can see the global preferences, and these apply to the entire collections application, all business units. Then we have preferences here that can be applicable to certain business units, and then correspondence settings or preferences at the bottom here. Of course, if we are looking for those settings that are going to be important for broken promises, the first one we want to focus on is number of grace days before a promise is broken. Now, what does that mean? This right here, the number populated for this particular field or setting will indicate the number of days granted after the promise date before a promise is considered to be broken. So you are giving your customer maybe 1, 2, 3 days, and in this case we are giving basically it's 0. So once that promise date is here, and provided that the customer does not make the payment, then following that date, we are going to consider that promise to be broken based on this scenario here where we have the number 0 populated. However, if we populate the number 1, 2, or 3, then that means those numbers are going to indicate the number of days that you are providing to your customer as grace days before you consider a promise to be broken. So that means that maybe the payment promise date is supposed to be on a Monday, but you are giving them maybe 2 additional days. So you'll give them Tuesday, you'll give them Wednesday. By Thursday, that payment promise is going to be considered to be broken because the payment promise day came and went. You gave them 2 additional days or 3 or whatever the number is, and they did not send the payment. So that's what grace days indicates. You're giving your customer additional flexibility there to make that payment before you consider the promise to be broken. Now, another setting here that we want to discuss is maximum number of days to make a promise. And this indicates the number of days in the future that a customer can promise to pay. Now, of course, for both of these settings that we see here, you can populate numbers between 0 and 9999. So that means 9,999. Right here we are saying that we are not going to allow payment promise dates that exceed more than 30 days. Okay, that's what we see here. Now let's navigate to the corresponding preferences section, and we are going to see additional settings here that have to do with the payment process functionality. Now here we see the option to send a promise notice. Okay, and of course if we'll find it all the way to the right, there are other settings here for dispute notices, payment notices, but we are talking about promise notices all the way to the right. And what does that mean? That means that if the option is set to yes, the customer will be notified of payment promises made to their account. Of course, this is not mandatory, so you can set it to no so that no notices are sent to the customer. If indeed this setting, send promise notice, is set to yes, then you have to pick a template. And we deliver a template, the one that we see here, the promise confirmation letter. It does include wording about the promise that the customer has made, amount and dates, etc. So the customer, once they receive the notice, they are going to see information in that notice based on what's in this template that we see here, the promise confirmation letter, which is a business intelligence publisher template. All right, so I'm going to return to the PowerPoint now. And we've discussed some important configurations. Now we'd like to talk about managing payment promises. Now, one thing we want to highlight is that promises can be canceled. If they have been entered in error, the collector has the ability to cancel them, but only if those payment promises have not reached the due date. Okay, so they can be canceled prior to the due date or that scheduled date in which you are expecting payment. Now, there's no need to track expected payments manually because this is done automatically. So how is this done automatically? Well, we have a program or process with the name Promise Reconciliation Process. That is the program that will reconcile payments made against those open promises. Right, so we want to show you how to run this process. The best practice is to schedule this Promise Reconciliation program to run daily. So let's go to the application. And what I'll do is hit cancel here. I am in the functional setup manager at this point, but what I want to do is navigate to schedule processes. So I'm going to click on the navigator, tools, schedule processes. So here I'm going to click on schedule new process. And I'm going to run a search. I'm looking for promise reconciliation. Okay, so Here's the process, and then there's a report. There is a report associated with this process. So I'm going to select this line, promise reconciliation. Hit OK, and it gives me a description of this process or job. It tells me that this job analyzes payments received and attempts to match them to